I love that music. Like the guy that got that for me, I love that. So thank you, Chris. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Employee Engagement Live. I'm with my two favorite people to talk to you guys about this topic. Remy Meraz, the CEO of Zella Life, and Julian Lewis, her COO and co-founder. And I'm really grateful to be here with you guys every month to share like some tips, some tricks, some things we notice, because we're talking to companies all the time that are having some things going on about their employee engagement. And last week when we started creating this episode, the conversation about meetings became the thing, and how people are just tired of meetings. They're tired of Zoom meetings. They're tired of in-person meetings. They feel like it's a big waste of time. So without me spending a lot of time on the meeting that we had, let's just, okay, fine. Shameless plug, right? But without doing that, let's talk a little bit about that. Remy, why don't you set the stage for us on what our conversation is going to be today?
Yeah, it's about meeting overload, but it's not that it's new, right? We had tons of in-person meetings pre-pandemic, but now that we're working in this hybrid remote environment, there is a new phenomenon of Zoom meeting fatigue happening, and we're seeing that with our clients all across the board. And I think it's about understanding that because we are in this new hybrid remote environment, that it's going to call for new strategies on how to have successful meetings and prevent some of the things that are happening with individuals, with your talent, because of all of these meetings. Julian, you want to throw anything in here?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is all across the board, Jeff, and I know Harvard Business Review did a survey on this, and they talked about they surveyed 182 senior managers in a range of industries. 65% said meetings keep them from completing their own work. 71% said meetings are unproductive and inefficient. 64% said meetings come at an expense of deep thinking. 62% said meetings miss opportunities to bring the team closer together. So this is all across the board. And what we've noticed with the deep thinking part is it creates a distraction from getting into the flow state when it comes to work. So even the work output isn't the best production because they don't have the state of the flow state that they normally would when it comes to their work.
That brings an interesting point up, Julian. I just want to capture for a second. When I hear the deep thinking, like that's the knowledge worker to me. And there are a couple of things that show up right away, specifically in today's moment. Like we're actually starting to look at AI as a way to remove the thinking process for a lot of people. Like they're talking about having AI write software. They're talking about, a lot around AI. But that's going to be a while from now. In the moment today, with what you said, what I hear in that is there's different worker types that are affected by certain types of meetings, right? There are meetings to get work accomplished. There are update status meetings. There are a lot of meetings out there that people deem unnecessary. And I think one of the things I'm curious about and interested in as we go down this is, when you hear about meetings that are keeping people from wanting to be engaged, where they're meeting fatigue is setting in, like what shows up for them? What are you hearing when you're coaching clients?
Yeah, I'm hearing that there are way too many meetings, and here's what's happening. The deep thinking part of it is more not as a deep thinker or knowledge based. It's flow state. So what happens is there are job tasks that each employee has, and they're on task to do these things, and the meetings are shotgunned across their entire day. And so each meeting becomes a distraction in getting accomplished what they need to get accomplished. And that creates tension, that creates overwhelm, and that adds to the stress of a day for the employee. And on top of that, the meetings are creating the same overwhelm for the company. They have a lot of meetings that could just be a status report email or a Slack that could be status report, and they're getting people on Zoom to talk about it. There are no agendas that are in these meetings. And so the meeting is haphazardly taking place where they're asking for a debriefing style meeting in most cases and not being specific with the type of meetings that they should be having on Zoom and how everything else can be some just a status report through like a Slack, like I mentioned. And then the last part of that is this: the meetings are running too long. And what we've noticed and what we've found is that when you just make a decision to cut the meetings in half, you can get really specific on what's necessary. And in our coaching, we go into deeper how to do that.
Hey, Remy, I'm curious. How many of the companies, or how often are the companies you're dealing with actually having meetings to define what a meeting ought to look like?
Everybody's doing that. And part of the challenge we have with this remote hybrid, workplace environment is that companies think that having meetings is a way to create engagement with each other.
Hmm.
It's a tool to create the interaction, but it's having there's some disadvantages to that, right? Because the fatigue piece is really real. We know that 45% of employees feel overwhelmed by this, but there's a couple of things that come up around the fatigue in the meetings, and you talked about how they affect different people and different styles. And so I'll give you an example, like folks that are extroverts that need the in-person contact piece, right? Having virtual meetings all the time is going to probably be challenging for them because of having to sit still longer, right? And focus. So that intense focusing to be present in the meeting virtually, where if you're in person, you have different types of interactions in person, that's going to be challenging for those folks. I think about salespeople in those environments, right?
Well, if you think about salespeople, that's true. And having been one for many years, it occurs to me like the meetings they typically have are accountability meetings where they're being held to a promise. And so, like, no one wants to be in those meetings.
Right. But there's another piece to it. Think about the salesperson that has to now do a presentation over Zoom to a room full of decision makers.
Mm.
And this actually happened to me a few years ago when the pandemic was underway, where I did a presentation to a team of 10 folks, and they were all off camera.
Mm.
And so as a presenter, that was extremely difficult, right? Because you're used to picking up on nonverbal communication cues that happen. If someone looks distracted, if someone has a puzzled look on their face, oh, I understand they didn't quite get that information. Let me throw something else in here so they do understand.
No, that's a great point.
Right? So there's lack of nonverbal cues that you miss out on when you have in-person meetings. Also, that intense, prolonged eye contact, right? That in a physical meeting, you may not have to worry so much about that because there's other things happening. You're looking at the presentation, right? You're shuffling papers, you're looking at a report. But with Zoom, and video technology, where we're just having to be fully present, and then let's throw in the new way of life where we know people are working from home. So you may hear the baby crying. You may have, as we had in one meeting last week, Julie and I were laughing because the woman was having the meeting at a family member's home. She was out of town, and her cousin didn't realize she had a virtual screen and was crawling behind her, right? And she was distracted because her cousin was crawling, trying not to disrupt the meeting, but it ended up disrupting the meeting because we all got a good laugh at it, right? So there's these kind of new ways of being in meetings because we have life happening around us. We've gotten kind of used to that, but there's still distraction in that, right? In having a focused meeting or technology connection issues.
Perfect. So what I'm really hearing and what the two of you are saying, and I want to make sure everyone gets this not as a right or wrong, good or bad thing, but the integrity of the meeting is compromised. And when I say integrity, I want you to think about like a rope, right? It's been worn down, like it can only handle 2 pounds of weight before it breaks, as opposed to, someone lied or just, embezzling, right? That's two different types of integrity. The one I'm talking about is the one where the degree of it is people are not really letting you know that they're in the meeting by having their cameras off. People are not fully engaged in the meeting. They're distracted, but you don't necessarily know that if you're the one holding the meeting. And, I think I'm going to guess one of the reasons we have meeting fatigue and why people are not on with their cameras is because like they're just tired. Like
Avoidance.
it takes something to be looking at the camera so people get you're focused on them. There's an extra level of energy. And I know with a lot of people I talk to, they're multitasking. And the reason that they're doing it is there just doesn't seem like there's enough time in the day. And so there's something about managing priorities. There's something about the teams being aligned and having all of that work together that would probably have a great impact on a 30-minute meeting versus a 60-minute meeting.
Absolutely. And I think it's about really understanding your workforce and your various teams within that workforce, because those teams may work differently, have different dynamics. And it's surveying folks and understanding what's going to work best for everybody. And again, it's about how we have to come up with new strategies because of this new environment.
Well, let's talk about that. Like, what are a few strategies, Julian? Why don't you kick this part off? What are a few strategies that?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because we're talking about meetings and we're in a meeting, and I have King barking, and this is part of it. So, here's one strategy to understand. Instead of expecting your employees to come to an in-home meeting the same way that they would come to a boardroom meeting, give them the grace to understand that we're human and that we're home and that we have dogs barking. We have cousins doing army crawls behind our virtual screen. We have brothers and family members who walk in and out. And that's what happens. We have maintenance men and Amazon Prime ringing doorbells. And these are things that happen and they're real. And there shouldn't be any tension that's involved with that. Here's why: because we all have it. And we've all been in a situation where, so that's the first part. Going into as a manager, saying that openly so that your team can take a breath.
Yeah, I think I'm sorry, I just got what I really hear in that is like just getting, we're all people, we're human, we live lives. And when we're working from home, there's some benefits to that. Like we save 2 hours of driving a day to get to and from work so we can get actually more accomplished. And then there's all of the stuff that goes along with like being around other people in an environment that's not the office.
Right.
It's called the messiness of life.
Oh, there, thank you.
Normalizing the messiness of life.
And here's the thing. We actually see it as messy because we're an attempt to do this odd thing and being an 80s baby, I'm a part of that. And this odd thing of putting your best foot forward, which is another nice way of saying, don't be authentic. And so life is life. And I wouldn't even say that it's messy. It just is. And things happen and we can be aware of it. But there are some signs, there are some things that will help you to be able to determine whether you or your team have a lot of the meeting fatigue. And so some of those signs are: you feel exhausted, You feel exhausted or tense after a video call. I know if a meeting's going too long, I'll start doing this and I feel tense and exhausted. I don't know if you two can relate. And then the thought of another video call makes you grumpy. Okay, so that's a funny one, and it's true. I mean, sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe another one. Or you lose focus during the meetings. You have a squirrel moment regularly, and then you might have muscle pain or tension, or deal with insomnia because of it, and then you feel frustrated with yourself or coworkers that or those around you. So you're on high alert. You feel irritated. So those are signs that you may have meeting fatigue, and cutting it back, there are some respectful ways that you can get time back, and there's some great ones, but I'll give one tip that you can do right now, and it's not changing your schedule, it's not cutting things in half. If you wanted to get some time back, all you would have to do is at the beginning of the meeting, Jeff, you'd say, hey, before we get started, I have a hard stop at this particular time. So the meeting can go on for 60 minutes, but I will be off in 30. And so if you can say that up front, you can excuse yourself from the meeting and you can get more of that time back to get focused on the things that matter to you most.
That's really awesome, Julian. You know, it kind of brings back a few memories when I was working at IBM. We would have meetings that would have 40 people in a meeting. Just think about this for a second. 40 people, the hourly rate of 40 people.
Right.
That is an expensive meeting.
Right.
And if it's not valuable, what a waste, right? But if one person or two people are speaking, right, as opposed to 40 people actually contributing, what's the value of that?
Right.
And every culture has a different way of working and communicating, but I think it goes back to a couple things. Whenever I've ever heard anyone say, or been the one myself to say, you know what, I'm going to manage this meeting so we get 15 minutes of our day back. Are you guys aligned with that? Like if I do that in the beginning of a meeting and everyone's mindset is like, oh, this is 45 instead of 60. Now, you might need the 60, but not everybody will need to be in all of it if you manage the time. If you're regularly looking and saying, hey, we've been live now for 18 minutes. I told you guys we're going to run 20, 25 minutes. It looks like we're probably going to go to 25 today. But we're managing the time, and I think that's often what's missing. And by the way, going back to the word integrity, there's integrity that gets built and trust when you give people time back. Goodwill gets created.
Absolutely. And you brought up a great point, you know, where you have multiple peoples in meetings, and especially, and when you have more people, things can go a little awry or people can go on. And that's why it's really important to create a meeting agenda and share it in advance so everybody's operating from the same page. And then making sure that we're only inviting essential people to a virtual meeting, right? And then communicating that up front, because we did have a situation with an organization where someone wasn't invited to the meeting in person. They asked them to participate via Zoom, and everybody else that was in the meeting was in person, and the person took it personal. Right? And
It made it mean something.
Made it mean something when it turns out the team leader who set the meeting up did it out of respect for her time and not having to travel across town to a building. And it just so happened that those other 9 participants were in the same building, so they all just went to the same conference room. But right, so but she took it personal. But had the team leader just communicated to her, hey, FYI, because she was the only one and she happened to be diverse talent, so she made it mean something else. But the team leader could have said, hey, just FYI, I'm having you participate via Zoom because of this, right?
Well, and I wonder also if that could have been turned into a question as opposed to a statement, which might have landed differently. Like, hey, I'm just curious. would it save you some time? Would you appreciate the
Or
opportunity?
do you want to be a part of the group because we haven't been all together, right?
Well,
But she would have wanted that interaction.
Right.
And then, yeah.
Absolutely hit the nail on the head.
And then another great thing that folks can do is record virtual meetings and then share them, because we know that everybody's overworked, overwhelmed, have lots of projects, may feel that time constraint and need to focus on something. But if they don't need to be there, you can record it and share that with them.
Well, and I'll share something around status meetings, because there's a lot of that in the book I wrote, Countable. Just I put a whole meeting schedule in there because, frankly, there's a lot of status checking that needs to be done all the way through the ranks in order to make sure companies are aligned. It's just those meetings often degenerate into other topics where they're working on problems or working on solutions, as opposed to, hey, look, here are my 5 priority action items. Can we just want to get status? Like, that can be like a 5 or 10 minute meeting if you are aiming for that, and you don't have to set up a full hour. Like, look for the opportunities, right? Where it doesn't have to be an hour-long meeting, especially if it's a one-on-one.
It also forces people to get laser on their communication and what they need to share, using essential words, essential information that's critical to the agenda at hand.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned there are certain types of software now where we use to help with project management, where it doesn't have to be a meeting, where you have voice memo, where you can say, we're doing a status report, voice memo, and now they're laser focused because it only gives you a certain amount of time. And so that time doesn't give enough time for a story. And so now everything is recorded, everything is there, the status is updated, and we can go about our day without having to set a meeting where everyone needs to be coordinated in our effort to be on screen.
Boy, there's a lot here in this conversation today. And I told you guys I was managing time and promised to do that. We're doing good, by the way. But I just really want to acknowledge like all the ideas and experience and stories you guys brought to share. I think this conversation about time management and meeting management is a big one for a lot of companies. But rather than having meetings to have more meetings to talk about what they should or shouldn't be, I would really invite people, reach out to any of us. Like, we'd love to have a conversation with you. Yes, it might be a meeting, just saying. But let us share some thoughts with you, because like, you've got people reporting to you who you respect, you care about, they make good money, and the last thing you want to do is waste their time in meetings or have them leave one with that experience. So with that, for Remy and for Julian, this is Jeff Cohen. It's been really great being with you today, and we'll look forward to talking about another fun topic next month.
Let us know what you want to hear.